Well, good morning. I'll say that, and I'll say hello to hopefully the people that are being recorded at the moment, seeing it's online. I say hopefully. I'm not sure how that's going to last. Anyway, we can only try. Do our best. So here we are, the last sermon in a 6-week series on Made for Mission. How have you enjoyed it? Who's been for all of them? Anybody? Only me. Oh, Liz and me. A lot of them are up online. There was one that glitched out. Now, it was me. It wasn't intentional. But we've been talking about how, as Christians, we've been called to join God on his mission to reach the world. And we've talked about how we are to live mission. That's what we've been talking about. Now, I've got a question, though. May seem a bit left of field, but let's see how we go. Who here can name their grandparents? Sure, good. Okay, what about your great-grandparents? There's one hand up too. What about your great-great-grandparents? Without Googling.
Maxine can, because her great-great-great was Henry Holland, and they go back for 5,000 generations. Same name.
Yeah, but overall, it's a pretty rare thing, isn't it? Yeah. I struggle. You know, grandfather was Clary. My great-grandfather was a guy known as Sandy Stewart. Might have been a Robert after that. I don't know. A William. You know what I mean? Yeah, we run out, don't we? We don't remember. And the sad thing to say is that in time, guess what? You're going to be forgotten too. Aren't you? Depending on when the Lord returns. They won't be shaking her head. That's right, she will never be forgotten. At a point, your name will be forgotten. But there's good news. The good news is that God's calling on your life is bigger than your lifetime, isn't it? The things you do for God in this life will continue on. Now, today we're going to have a bit of a look at the Bible and a guy called Peter. Now, Peter was how do you describe it? He was an open mouth, insert foot kind of guy. Like me. Again, you'd stop it. If you've ever made a mistake in your life, a silly mistake, said things you shouldn't have said, done things you shouldn't have done, Peter's your guy. He is a guy who made some, and I'm going to use the word, bonehead mistakes. He really is. So we're going to read some Bible passages. I'm going to read some Bible passages now from the book of Luke. And we'll start in Luke 8:40 to 42. Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named, and I'm going with Jairus. Does that sound right to those who like their biblical pronunciations correct? Yeah. I'm told if you say these words confidently, people just believe you. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. So Jairus meets Jesus and his disciple at the docks. His description is as a synagogue leader. And that was a big deal. In that culture, think maybe mayor, I don't know, if Andrew was here back in the, maybe federal member of parliament, but someone with a significance in the town. And this could have been a really big opportunity for this small startup movement led by Jesus. If a synagogue leader were to become a follower, it might influence the whole city, even and even the surrounding region. So I don't know what Jesus is thinking, but I bet the disciples are not blind to this opportunity that's in front of them, which means we better get to the house fast before they miss the opportunity to do something. But then what happens? As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that the power has gone from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. And in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now this is a really interesting scene, isn't it? Massive crowds are surrounding Jesus, pressing to get closer to him, yet he stops mid-stride and asks, "Who touched me?" Now, have you ever been in a really super big crowd where people are crushing against you? I've been in a few. A really memorable one for me was, I'm going to say about 88, 87, 88. I went to a Stryper concert. Now, not many people will know Stryper. They were a Christian heavy metal band back in the late 80s. And we went to a gig, me and my friends, at Festival Hall in Melbourne. Now, who knows Festival Hall in Melbourne? The big black doors and the road. There were so many, the truck broke down getting to the concert. The band is late. And there's probably 3,000 or 4,000 plus people out the front of Festival Hall waiting to get in. And when they finally opened a door, you just got carried in. Literally, I felt like my feet weren't even touching the ground at points. But that's what it's like to be in a big crowd. Who's touching me? Well, everybody. Everybody. So you can imagine, asking that question, "Who touched me?" seems a little bit comical, doesn't it? The answer? Everybody. Now, it doesn't make any sense. What also makes no sense is that Jesus stops on his way to a big ministry opportunity to talk to somebody that everybody else has ignored. Because there's a lot of things we can probably guess about this woman. One is she's probably poor. One of the other Gospels says that she'd spent all her money trying to find a cure, but nothing had worked. She's probably all alone because we don't hear about anybody else who's with her. She was probably seriously shamed in this city. The religious leaders taught that diseases were a punishment from God, and thus people should stay away from you. And still, with all this baggage, she takes a massive risk. Based on the Old Testament law, people would believe that this disease would permanently make her unclean, and anything she touched would become unclean as well and should be avoided. People know this person. She has a reputation. And as she's pushed away through the crowd to get to Jesus, she would most likely have endured comments like, "What are you doing here? Go home where you belong." And yet she's shoved aside to the side. She's probably shoved to the side and given dirty looks. And yet, in all of this, the woman is relentless in getting to Jesus. And it pays off and it changes her whole life. You have no idea when God wants to use you, do you? Your greatest impact will probably come at a time you're least expecting it. For a woman, this woman had been suffering with this disease for 12 years. She'd prayed to God multiple times to remove it over that time. If you've walked in here today carrying a prayer request for what seems like forever, that you're still waiting for, learn that lesson from this woman. Don't give up. Run to Jesus. Be relentless in that, because there's always hope, and he can do more in a moment than we can ever do in a lifetime. Going to continue reading some Bible. Funny thing for a church, isn't it? Luke, continuing from Luke, in Luke. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe. She will be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go with him except Peter, John and James, and the child's father and mother. And meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." And the spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. So they get to Jairus' house, and his daughter is already dead. I wonder if some of the disciples were shaking their head, saying, if we didn't do that stop, I bet we would have made it. Jesus grabs just a couple of the guys and the girl's parents and goes up to see the dead girl. And he says to them, "She's just sleeping." I wonder what that reaction was like. How would you react to that? In the Bible, it says there people laughed at him. Like, what sort of laugh is that? Something God did, probably. And Jesus ignores the apparent lack of faith, grabs the girl's hand and raises her up from the dead. Think about this girl's life. Now there's a story, isn't it? Think about the parents. The synagogue leader of the area probably just became a follower of Jesus. I think a lot of us have read these two stories before. And as I've sort of gone through this again, I wonder if there's a point in the story that we've missed. Well, I'll miss. Maybe you didn't. And this is it. When Jesus arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John and James and the child's father and mother. So why Peter? What had he just done not long ago? He'd questioned Jesus in public. Shouldn't he, by this point, have learned to stop talking back to Jesus? But then Jesus brings him along to Jairus' house. He's probably involved in this laughter. And when Jesus says that the girl is sleeping. As I said before, God's calling on your life is bigger than your lifetime. But it's not an automatic truth. See, we need to join God on his mission. That's when it will become true. So how do we do that? Well, that's kind of been the whole point of this series. So hopefully I can come out with just one more truth for you. We need to bring someone with us. Bring someone with you. As you go and live the mission you were made for, don't go alone. Bring someone along for the ride. And I think this is probably one of the single greatest lessons that we learn from the life of Jesus. Now, we can make a strong case that Jesus is the greatest leader of all time, and yet he never wrote any books. He never did a podcast. He never held a public office. He never went outside of one small area of the world. And he was on the public scene for a little over 3 years only. And he died at the age of 33. And yet, here we are, more than 2,000 years later. And there are over 2 billion people following him from all corners of the globe in hundreds of different languages. That's pretty good leadership, don't you think? Bring someone with you. You know how many times it says in the Bible that Jesus took his disciples and they went somewhere? I gave up trying to count. So if anyone knows, let me know. He intentionally took people with him in everything he did. Sure, he did some things alone. He took time, to look after himself and to break out. But the evidence is abundantly clear that he was intentional in bringing people with him. Listen to Jesus' last words to us from Matthew 28. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Now, in the Greek, apparently, because we all know I don't speak Greek, the literal translation is as you go through this world, make disciples. As you go. It's talking about being intentional in the way you live your life and the way you share Jesus with people. With the people you meet and then disciple into faith. See, I'll start again. So the other application is this, and I've never heard anyone say this before, but it's obvious when you look at Jesus' life, is don't just disciple the people you meet along the way, but bring people along with you and disciple them while you go through your day-to-day responsibilities. I've been going out fishing just a little bit lately. I think I've missed one weekend in about the last 3 months. And I think I'm being challenged to find ways to turn that into a discipling opportunity. And it's going to be interesting because it's the as you go thing through this world, and what a great place to do it. Bit of river, maybe a fire, cook a sausage. Who's coming? Well, there you go. But I think it's an opportunity, and one thing I'm noticing is if I'm down at the same place at the same time on, say, Saturday, Merbeen, Coena Bend. You know, there are people who walk past at the same time. And you start talking to them. You know, a minister that in a church I was in years ago, he used to go to the same service station to fuel up his car on the same night at the same time, so that he intentionally connected with the guy behind the counter, and he picked a slow time so that he could actually stop and have a conversation with the guy. You know, as he was going through his life, he was picking times and opportunities to be with people and go with them. Jesus ends with promising that he'll be with us always to the very end of the age. And if he's truly in the driver's seat of your life, then it's not so much you bringing him with you, but instead, he's bringing you with him. What Jesus did for the disciples 2,000 years ago, Jesus still wants to do in our lives today. As he disciples us now, he invites us to do the same with others. So, what happens with Peter? I think in the end he finally got it, didn't he? Jesus can raise the dead. Even death is not an insurmountable barrier when it comes to Jesus. So what if Jesus didn't bring Peter along in that moment? Then I wonder if Jesus would have learnt the lesson that a future time he was involved in. If we read Acts 9, 36 to 42, in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, in Greek, her name is Dorcas, and she was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. I say Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please come at once." Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room, and he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning to the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." And she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter heals Tabitha in the same way that Jesus had healed Jairus' daughter. Many people came to believe in Jesus all throughout Joppa simply because he took Peter with him years earlier. God is a connecting the dots kind of God, isn't he? You know, we often talk about upper story and lower story. We have no idea what God wants to do through us and when he wants to do it. God's calling on your life is bigger than your lifetime. There is only one thing that will last. The stuff you're stressing about now won't last. It'll probably be no big deal in a couple of years. And your own great-grandkids that wouldn't even exist if not for you won't even necessarily know about it. And they won't necessarily know your name. But if you bring someone with you, that will be celebrated for all eternity. What is God calling you to? Who can you bring with you on this mission? Who in your life does not know God? And who will you invite to pursue God with you?